Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, which features stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life story for present-day listeners and for the generations to come. Our entire collection is available at voicesofoklahoma.com. By subscribing to our podcast, you will be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. So now listen to another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com.
King Kirchner was co-founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of Tulsa-based Unit Corporation from 1963 to 2001. Following retirement, he continued to serve as a director of Unit Corporation, the fourth largest onshore drilling contractor in the United States. Kirchner grew up in Perry and graduated from Perry High School in 1945. At age 16, he began working as a roughneck in the oil fields. Kirchner received his degrees in mechanical engineering from Oklahoma State University and in petroleum engineering from the University of Oklahoma. He served in Germany during the Korean conflict, and between 1954 and 1963 was an engineer and then vice president of the unit drilling division of Woolaroc Oil Company in Bristow. Kirchner and his partner invested $10,000 each and then borrowed $140,000 to buy 3 rotary drilling rigs, along with the unit drilling name in 1963, thus founding Unit Drilling Company, which later became Unit Corporation. Listen to King Kirchner tell his story, which ranges from $10,000 to $50 million to Wall Street, and made available on the Oral History website, voicesofoklahoma.com.
My name is John Erling. Today's date is November 1st, 2017. King, would you state your full name, please?
Yes, sir. My name is King Kirchner. My middle name is Pouder, P-O-U-D-E-R, so it's King Pouder Kirchner, which is an unusual name, but that was my grandfather's name. His last name was Pouder, P-O-U-D-E-R. He was Harry C. Pouder, but a nickname of King.
This is on your mother's side.
On my mother's side, the first grandchild, and I got named after him.
You were named King after your grandfather. Was that his legal name?
No, sir. His name was Harry Clyde Pouder, P-O-U-D-E-R.
And then King became a nickname?
Yes, he was a boxer and an oil man in the early days in Tulsa in the 20s.
Your father, then, was the one who legally named you King.
Correct. Because they loved my grandfather. He was a great man. He was a magnetic personality.
And you remembered him, too?
Oh, yeah, I loved him.
And had an influence on your life.
Oh, definitely, yes.
The name King, a young boy growing up with the name King, were there any positives, negatives that came with that?
Oh, man. Yes, a lot of negatives when I was young. I took a lot of kidding. Well, what are you king of? And, all that sort of thing. But kids get used to anything, so it was fine. It became quite an asset later because that name could easily be remembered.
Yes.
Like our friend Boone. They called him Boone.
You're talking about Boone Pickens.
I'm talking about Boone Pickens, yes.
T. Boone Pickens.
T. Boone Pickens, yes. Sir.
Right. Your date of birth?
November 18, 1927.
And your present age?
Present age is within 2 weeks of 90.
So you're 89 today.
I am.
But in 2 weeks you will be 90 years old.
I'm 89 for a short time, yes, sir.
Where are we recording this interview?
We're in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at my office.
Where were you born?
Actually, I was born in Kansas City, but soon thereafter moved back to Perry, Oklahoma, where we lived. May I tell you why I was in Kansas City to be born?
I would like to know.
Perry didn't have much of a hospital, if any, when my mother was pregnant. And her mother, my grandmother, lived in Kansas City in a nice house with plenty of bedrooms, so when she was getting close to me being born, they went to Kansas City, and I was born up there in the hospital in Kansas City. As soon as I could travel, I came back to Perry, where we lived on a farm.
Your mother's name, maiden name, and...
Her name was Thelma Pouder, P-O-U-D-E-R again, yes.
Where did she grow up?
She grew up part of her time in Kansas City, and I think her high school days were in Tulsa, and she made a lot of friends over here. They also lived in Perry, where my granddad had come down from Iowa, really right after the land rush. He didn't make the land rush. My other grandfather's brothers made the land rush. But anyway, he came down to maybe buy some cheap land. He bought a farm that we grew up on and gave $500 for it, 160 acres. By the time he bought it, there was a house built on it. But there wasn't enough farm. There was only 16 acres of cultivated ground out of this 160. The rest was just grassland. Couldn't really make a living on farming. But my dad loved it. He grew up in Perry.
Let's talk more about your mother.
Okay.
What was her personality? What was she like?
She was absolutely wonderful. She led a very short life. She died at 55.
What took her life?
A stroke. Both my parents smoked. Well, everybody smoked in the family back in those days. I never did because I got sick of breathing that smoke in the car all the time. But anyway, that was one of the things. She had high blood pressure, and back in those days they didn't have very good medicine to control blood pressure. She was a wonderful, wonderful woman. She taught me how to live. She was a pretty sophisticated lady, actually. She taught me how to speak much better English than I presently speak. When I was a kid, she said, I want you to be able to put your gloves on and work with the farm hands or the oil field hands, or I want you to be able to put your tuxedo on and join the social crowd, or to go to New York and do anything you want to do. I want to try to teach you everything I know about life from one end to the other, so you'll be able to fit yourself in there wherever you happen to be.
That was pretty visionary thinking. You would think somebody living in Perry wouldn't think about New York or going out.
Listen, I had wonderful, wonderful parents.
So then your father's name?
This is interesting. Kenneth Kenton Kirchner. He was 3 Ks. After he was born, that KKK thing came up in the South, but he lived in Oklahoma, so that wasn't a big deal, but that was a little tough for him to deal with. But anyway, he had 2 brothers. He was a wonderful man, too. He grew up in Perry, Oklahoma. He was a high school athlete and smart as could be.
What was his personality? Outgoing?
Very outgoing and very hot-tempered. He was pretty tough, too. When his temper got him, the fists would fly. He was known as a pretty tough guy. He wasn't a real big man, but at some of the social events in Perry, if somebody got out of line and said something to him or something, why, they'd be on the floor before they knew it.
Was he a boxer?
He was a self-made boxer, yes. Everybody had a little boxing training in those days. I had a bag hanging in the garage that my folks, they all thought you needed to know how to fight a little bit.
Oh, so that was...
Yeah, my granddad was a boxer, and
right.
I got a picture of him in here showing him referee back in 1915 here in Tulsa.
Your father's profession, he was...
His father was in the real estate business in Perry. So he learned that profession growing up, but he branched out a little bit. He found a way to subsidize what little he made off the farm out there by buying leases and royalties and minerals, all that sort of thing, for oil companies. For instance, he went out to western Oklahoma at the direction of my granddad. This was during the Dust Bowl days, and all these farmers that had staked claims or had land, there was a great drought, and they were having great trouble making it. So he was able to buy 10-year leases. This was before any oil and gas activity had hit that area. And he was able to buy 10-year oil and gas leases and half the minerals for $1 an acre. The farmers were glad to have it because they still had their land to farm on. They had their surface. But a lot of them didn't make it. That's when a lot of the Okies moved to California. Mm-hmm. And if you recall, Will Rogers said when the Okies moved to California, it raised the IQ of both states. Anyway, those drought times helped my dad make a living, actually. That's the way he made his living. He was a lease broker. He traveled a lot. He was gone a lot, but he still...
Did he ever explore and discover oil?
No, he didn't. He bought a few minerals for himself when he could.
Did you have brothers or sisters?
No brothers or sisters, no.
It's interesting. You're a fairly tall person. How tall are you?
Well, at one time I was 6'3". Now, in my old age, I'm about 6'2" or 6'1.5" or something.
You're obviously taller than both your parents.
I am, yes. My mother was a slender, tall person, but I probably look more like her than I do my dad. He had a broken nose like mine, though. I used to have a straight nose, but
so his
had
broken
a few
nose came
collisions there.
His broken nose came from fights?
Probably so, yes. Mine came from falling off a horse, riding bareback, and landing on my face. That was the first time I broke it, but there were other times.
You mentioned the Dust Bowl. Do you remember the effects of the Dust Bowl at all?
I was pretty young then, but yes, I do. Before they learned circular irrigation like they have out west now, we had horrible dust storms. And we had many years of drought. The irrigation thing has changed all that because they discovered the Ogallala water zone out there in western Oklahoma, Texas Panhandle, in that area. That's where all our dirt flows from. It comes in this area usually. I remember huge dust storms and dry fields and no crops.
They say the dust would come in the house through windows and doors.
Oh, yeah. We had no air conditioners in those early days. No. It was windows open with screens. We'd poke our beds up as close to a window as we could and have the screens open at night. But red dirt had come in and cover everything. We lived in a white house. There's a picture in there on the wall. I'll show you in a minute. That house was old, and we had shingles on it. My job when I got older, about every summer I had to paint the house white, and I got up and painted wood shingles silver to reflect the heat so it wouldn't be so hot inside. And if you don't think that's hot on top of a roof, painting glaring silver paint on there, trying to paint wood shingles with a brush, that's interesting too.
So you had
to get all those cracks and crevices. That was one of my teenage jobs.
As you look back, it was instilling in you a work ethic.
Absolutely.
Whether you wanted it or not, it was there.
Well, this White House would be covered with red dust. We really didn't have enough water there for hose pressure or anything, so I just had to kind of brush it off, and then I'd paint the white paint with more white paint, only it'd turn out a little pink with that red dirt in it. That didn't make much money, but I was a cheap house painter.
Do you remember the storms coming so bad you couldn't see through
Absolutely couldn't see anything. I remember big rolling clouds of red dirt rolling in from the west, and it would just almost blind you. I mean, it was like a wall of red dirt in the air. Yes, I saw that many times.
It's probably like you couldn't really feel like you were getting clean.
Quite right. We had a cistern for drinking water, a system my dad put in, where you had to get water off the roof, rainwater, and filter down through charcoal. And then it went into this below-ground concrete tank, and that's what we pumped drinking water up from.
And that was called a cistern.
It was called a cistern,
yeah.
And it had to go through that charcoal filter, otherwise it'd have too much dirt in it.
Okay.
We were the first farm around there to have running water, and one of the first to have electricity. Most of our farmer friends within miles of us had no electricity, no running water, no inside plumbing, all outhouses.
Was that because you could afford it or the others couldn't?
Yes, both of those. Plus, my parents, they'd grown up in towns and they wanted it as soon as they could get it. But actually, when I was small, we had candlelight and lanterns.
Because you did not have electricity.
That's correct. But finally, my dad was able to buy a used 32-volt generator that we had to go out and start at sundown. It would run until the tank ran out of fuel, and then it stopped. We'd go to bed.
Do you remember your early days of listening to the radio when that came along?
Oh, yes. Radio was wonderful. I never saw television until I was in the Army in Fort Riley, Kansas. But we didn't have radio before we had electricity till we bought a battery radio. So we had a battery radio that we'd have to change the batteries in. But we listened to that radio, yeah. We'd all gather around that radio, and that was our source of
You remember any of the programs that you might have listened to?
Oh, yeah. There were a couple of after-school serials that I listened to. Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy, and some of those. I'd go in there and hide and listen to the radio because I was supposed to be outside doing chores, feeding the animals and all that kind of stuff. My dad would call me, get me away from that radio. Sometimes I'd go out and turn the car radio on and get down the floorboard of the car so I could listen to my radio serial. I'd hide out. Yeah, so, John, I used to listen to you a lot, too. So
yeah, but not back then you didn't.
No, sir. You weren't around.
So you went to elementary school there in Perry.
I did.
And then junior high school.
That's kind of interesting. On our land, 160, the land arrangement by the government was there'd be a schoolhouse every few miles where they'd build a local schoolhouse so the country kids could go to school. We had one on our place. There was a schoolhouse 40 there, we called it.
Why did they call it 40?
Because it was located on a 40-acre parcel that would be designated as schoolhouse 40, although the schoolhouse itself only took like half an acre or something. We had one on our farm, and it was 1 through 9 grades, all in one room, with no partitions. And outhouse for the boys, outhouse for the girls. No running water, and no electric lights. That's where I went my first 3 years. I was really lucky because when I was 5 years old, my dad gave me a Shetland pony, which was the meanest little horse in the world. They're just awful. Anyway, I woke up one morning, he was shoving a Shetland pony in my bedroom.
He walked it into your bedroom?
Yes, I still have the saddle, too. My house, yeah, I have the saddle and the bridle, yeah. They had to push it in there. The Shetland ponies are really stubborn.
They don't like to go into bedrooms.
No, they don't mind well. And anyway, the horse was in control. They put a saddle on him, put me on him out in the yard, and right away he tried to rub me off, rubbing up against the fence. He was a mean little rascal. Later on, I got a better horse, but I used to ride that pony to school up there. You could walk faster usually than I could ride on that pony.
Did you ride him to school and tie him up?
Yes.
Others probably did the same thing.
Remember I said 1 through 9, I was the only kid in the first grade. We had some ninth graders there, and they were big old tall boys. One afternoon said, I bet I can beat you home running. I bet I can beat your horse. And I said, oh, no way. Boy, we took off on a race, and he beat me a long way.
Really?
Oh, he could run faster than that Shetland pony, yeah. I couldn't make that Shetland pony go fast. He was just so stubborn. He was terrible. But anyway, I finally got a bigger-sized horse that was great. So I grew up riding all my life.
In high school, Perry High School, you were involved in sports, were you?
Yes, I finally got a motorcycle that I could ride to school, but before that I had to take the school bus. There were only 2 sports that were practiced during school hours, and that was wrestling. We had an hour in the afternoon for wrestling. And then during basketball season, it was basketball. But football took place after. I tried football a little bit, but I wasn't really meant to be a football player. I don't think. My dad was a pretty good football player, so he said in high school. I think he was, really. Anyway, so I was a wrestler. Grew up in the wrestling team. That was good. I was real skinny when I was young and tall, so I was the tallest guy on the wrestling team.
Was high school academically a good experience for you, or something you didn't like?
Well, I started off slow in school. Like I said, I went to country school. I was the only kid in the first grade, and then when I graduated second grade, I was the only kid in the second and the only kid in the third. So the teacher didn't pay much attention to me, would just get me busy on drawing pictures or something over there instead of teaching me arithmetic. And when my folks finally discovered that I wasn't learning anything at that country school, why, they took me to town. My dad's stepmother and his father lived in Perry, and I'd go every day to lunch at their house, and she would teach me after school, too. She would get me caught up on my arithmetic and things. She was a great help. Without her, I'd never caught up. They took me down to school. He didn't want to have to do that drive every morning. We didn't have school bus service then, but we finally got school bus service. But I had to ride the bus like the other country kids. So.
What was that teacher's name that was so helpful to you?
Not a teacher, my grandmother. Wilma Kirchner. She had been a school teacher,
okay,
but she married my grandfather after his wife died.
And she got you up to speed.
Yes, sir, she did. She taught me arithmetic and flashcards and all that stuff. She made me work really hard.
But by the time you got into high school, then
I was caught up, yeah.
You were caught up, right. That experience of high school academically, was that good for you?
Yes, yeah, it was good. And we had a really pretty nice bunch of people who went to high school there. Some of them I admired greatly and sort of followed their footsteps. One being one of your gentlemen that you had interviewed before, Ed Malzahn from Perry.
Yes.
Ed graduated from Perry, went over to Oklahoma A&M, got a degree in mechanical engineering, and then he started Ditch Witch and did quite well.
Yes.
I admired him greatly. And then there was Wayne Swearingen and Gene Swearingen. I don't know that you ever interviewed them, but they came over here to Tulsa and did quite well. So I sort of followed their footsteps in what I took in college and stuff. So high school, yes, it was good.
What year did you graduate from high school?
In 1945.
Let's then go back to December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor Day.
Yeah.
Do you remember that day?
Absolutely. It was sort of our custom that for entertainment, my dad would take Sunday afternoon off, or Sunday morning too, if he could. But anyway, we'd go to the movie on Sunday evening. There was only one movie theater in Perry, so whatever was on, that's what we saw. We went at a certain time, and when we got out, it wasn't very late in the evening, driving home in the car, on the radio, we heard about Pearl Harbor. I was in the back seat, the folks in the front. Our routine was Sunday evening, we'd go to the movie, we'd go over to the drugstore, which was the only place in town that served ice cream, and we'd usually get an ice cream sundae, then we'd drive home. Driving home is when I heard about Pearl Harbor.
You were 14 years old at the time.
That's right.
You would have been old enough to wonder what's this all about and what's it going to mean.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I could see my future might be determined by other events, you know.
Did it affect people of your family immediately going off to war?
Yeah, they thought it was a terrible thing. My dad got in just the end of World War I, and his brother was in the service, and his older brother had lost a foot in a shotgun accident young, so he didn't have to go to World War I. But World War I was a terrible event. They all remembered that.
The rationing that went on, did you remember that after the war started?
Oh, certainly. We were very fortunate to be living on the farm because everything was rationed. A lot of the groceries were rationed. Gasoline was certainly rationed. Tires, eggs, many things. Most everything went to the military effort. But we were on the farm. We had our own eggs. We had our own meat. We had our own beef. We had everything we needed to exist out there. Except flour, we'd have to buy flour. This was, like I said, before the days of electricity. By high school time, we had electricity. But from having a better generator, we later got rural electrification. All the farms did. We had gasoline for the tractors and stuff, and I was able to fudge a little bit of that for my motorcycle. By that time, I had a motorcycle. I've always been crazy about mechanical things. And my dad didn't really have time to take me to school every morning, so when I got to be 14, he made sure I got a drive to school driver's license. Then he helped me buy a real old rickety Harley-Davidson motorcycle. That was trouble all the time, but I learned a lot about mechanics because it was always broken down. I had to overhaul it and everything else, but I rode that to school. So I rode motorcycles to high school then I rode motorcycles to college, and I still have a couple of motorcycles.
Yeah?
Yes. I don't ride them very much, but I still have them.
Cars back then. You said you drove your father's car. What kind of car was it?
In my early days, I grew up in the days when the cars were open cars. They had canvas roof and isinglass windows or something, kind of windows that you just fasten on.
Ford Model
Yeah.
A's,
I went with my dad. I know the first time he bought a Model A, he'd had a Model T or something. I think when he and my mom got married, he was very proud of the fact that he had $30,000 in the bank. And he had some kind of an old car. I've forgotten what it was. Maybe it was a Model T. I went with him to buy a Model A, and I think it was $500. Might have been $6. I think it was $5. I was a little guy then when we got that.
$30,000. That was a lot of money in those days.
It was a lot of money, and he was very proud of that fact. He let me know that. And when he died, he had $225,000, which I inherited.
Wow. And it all came as a land broker?
Yes. He had a little bit of oil and gas royalty coming in, not a lot, a little bit. He was a real entrepreneur, a real hustling guy, and he was very conservative with what he spent.
But in the days after 41 and up to 45, when you graduated, did you hear about German concentration camps or any of that?
You know, we didn't hear a lot about the concentration camps yet because that news wasn't really known. We knew they were playing tough on the Jewish people, and we knew Hitler was out to kill as many Jews as he could. But the real horror of the concentration camps was starting to come out more during my high school years. Yeah, the horror of all that thing, and it just was awful. It looked to me like I was scheduled to go to the military, which all the men that graduated right before me in high school did go in the military if they were physically able.
You did eventually, but before that, you remember hearing any president on the radio on the first one?
Oh, sure. Yeah, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was a grand speaker. Yes. My grandfather, who was the most well-read of the family, he was an 8th grade graduate, but he read constantly. He was sort of the educator for the rest of us. He set the goals, and he didn't like Franklin Delano Roosevelt because of the income taxes. I guess they started the income taxes back in those days, and he thought that was terrible to take a man's money away that he'd worked hard for. I have to give a share of the government to be spent in any way they wished. He thought that was not good.
Did that skew your thinking?
Of course. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So he was a Republican then.
You know, I didn't really know the difference in those days because other than a few differences, it seemed like most of the people I grew up around were Democrats. But yes, finally the party name came to the front. But everybody was sort of of the same thinking, regardless which party they were in. Yeah. To me, Republicans and Democrats weren't that much different back then. And it certainly hadn't evolved into a racial thing in any way.
The day that Franklin Roosevelt died, do you remember that?
Yes, I do, but no, I don't remember the day specifically.
Yeah.
But I always thought the man was a great speaker, and he was trying to do the best he could in World War II. Everybody makes mistakes. The one I really was proud of was Harry Truman. Even though I was brought up pretty much as a Republican, Harry Truman probably saved my life because he went ahead and had the atom bomb dropped.
The bombing of Hiroshima, then.
Yeah.
Right. Stopped that war.
Right.
Was your grandfather around?
Yeah.
And did he like Harry Truman?
Oh, well, they call him Little Harry. I think they knew him in Kansas City. I think they knew him up there. You know, he was from Missouri. He was from Independence. Somehow or other, my family knew him. They kept calling him Little Harry, that haberdasher or something.
Yeah, I'd never heard of Little Harry before.
He was a really big man, but he strutted. I mean, he strutted. Of course, we saw him in all the newsreels and everything. But I thought that took a lot of courage to drop that bomb.
Yes. Let's go back to when you were 16 years old and you became a roughneck.
Okay.
Tell us about that experience.
Well, like I say, I grew up on the farm painting the house, and when that wasn't going on, I was working in the field. We didn't have tractors in those days. We had a big team of black horses, and we'd hook them up. We actually had walk-behind plows, walk-behind implements, stuff like that. My dad just loved horses and livestock. I was prone the other way. I liked everything mechanical out there. I liked the mechanics of the plow, the binder, the combine, all that other stuff. I just loved fixing that stuff. So I was always toward the mechanical things. Anyway, my dad made sure I stayed busy at all times. So I was working in the field. I had hay fever bad in those days, and scooping wheat and oats and pitching hay, baling hay, and all those other things we did. I was constantly stopped up and sneezing and nose running, and I was just miserable around all that grain chafe and stuff, and dust was kind of bad too. But anyway, I loved being out on the farm, but boy, I couldn't breathe well. So when I got a chance to get my hands on the grease, there was a company laying on a pipeline 2 miles north of the house. I heard about it, and my dad was paying me $5 a day for shocking wheat and scooping oats and stuff. And I found out I could make $12 a day for an 8-hour day working on this pipeline. I resigned from him and went up the road, which is fine with him, and got on this pipeline. I only had 2 miles to go to work. In those days, we screwed all the pipelines together, didn't weld them like we do now. So it took a crew of guys, some of them stabbing the pipe, the other guys with 2 sets of tongs, backups of lead tongs, and screwing them together.
That was pretty tough work, wasn't it?
It was. It was hard work, but boy, it paid $12 a day, so that was more than $1 an hour, man. I was tall cotton.
What did you do with your money?
Saved it. I grew up saving, and when I got enough, I'd buy a little better used motorcycle. Kind of like that song, I got up and put on my cleanest dirty shirt. I'd always trade for a better used piece of machinery.
Then you were 16 and still in high school.
Yeah, and I only worked summers there. I didn't work during, except on the farm. I had to get up and milk the cows and stuff in the morning, and then I'd go to school. And when I got home, we milked again morning and night. I had to feed all the animals.
You talked about wheat?
We had a little bit of wheat, not much, only
right.
16 acres. But mainly we raised food for the animals. We raised oats for the horses.
Okay.
My granddad had bought 80 acres over here north of Tulsa that had wonderful prairie hay on it. We'd bale that hay once a year and haul it over to Perry and feed the horses and cattle that prairie hay and raise a little alfalfa and stuff.
In your time on the farm, did they have steam engines?
They did, but they were too big and bulky. When we finally got our first tractor, it was a diesel John Deere with the 2 front wheels together, great big old back wheels, and no electric starter or anything. Had a great big heavy flywheel on the side, and you'd give that flywheel a whirl, and it'd go boom, 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 like that to start up. I loved driving that thing.
That was a good sound,
Oh,
wasn't
man.
it?
Oh, I loved driving the tractor and doing all that stuff. Yeah, I was in on the farm activity then. I loved it with the mechanical stuff. I still was sneezing my head off, but I loved the machinery part.
So you didn't have a combine?
No, we couldn't afford a combine, really, and we'd have that done. But I had to scoop a lot of wheat, and I scooped it for others. I mean, I worked for everybody around there. All the farm boys did. Whoever was doing some activity, and they usually needed help, why, they'd hire the other man's kids to work for them. It was sort of a mutual thing that went around. Wherever there was work, I went over and helped them, and when we needed something, they'd come over and work for us.
You've talked so much at work. Did you do anything for entertainment?
Yeah, I worked on that motorcycle. I did a lot of that, and we took a little time out every summer to go out to New Mexico. My granddad, he was looking for a place to get the women and kids out of the heat in the summertime. This was before air conditioning. So the year I was born, they were roaming around. They were out in Santa Fe, and they got in this neat little valley up the Pecos River there, and they found a place. The land wasn't for sale. It was government-owned, but you could buy a permit and build a house on it. They built a little rock house out there. My dad hauled the rocks out of the river up there, brown rocks. He didn't stay out there all the time, but he hauled enough rocks over and stuff for the man to build the stuff. But they built a little house out there. We still have it in the family.
Really?
Yeah.
What a precious thing to have.
It had no electricity, and it had no running water to start with. But, you talk about eco things. We had candles, and we had kerosene lanterns, and we had a gravity water pump that pumped water out of the stream up to a tank on the hill. And my dad, he liked all this new stuff, and he bought a bunch of lead-coated pipe. Didn't bury the pipe. It was too rocky in the ground. Just laid it on top because it was strictly a summer place. But we had pipes on top of the ground from the tank into the house, and then we could put in a sewage system and all that to a septic tank. Like on the farm, he did the same thing back at home.
Well, that's fond memories of that summer cabin.
Very much so. But I remember it was called a ram. You were using gravity. You laid the pipe way up the stream. The water would run down this pipe. It would hit this ram, which was a valve that as soon as the water got running hard, this valve would go close, and it'd squirt a little squirt of water up the hill to this tank on the hill. But the ram ran all the time in the stream just from gravity power. Took no outside power at all to keep water supplied for the house.
Well, that was using somebody's brain, was it?
And the water in the stream was pure enough to drink in those days. It was great. Little house in New Mexico, so I got to spend some time in the summers out there.
So as you graduated, did you then go right on to college?
Yeah, after working on summer on rigs, smashed one finger that summer, but I was coming up on the draft list to go in the military. My dad knew Senator Bob Kerr, who made rounds of all the farmers trying to get their votes, of course. Through that connection, I got a second alternate appointment to Annapolis. That was at least going to put me in school for a while instead of going directly to the war in the South Pacific. That was going to be okay, but the first alternate took it, so I never got my chance at that. Then Mr. Truman ordered the bomb dropped, and the war was over in the South Pacific before I actually had to go in the service at that time.
But you did go in.
I did.
But that's after school.
I went 35 miles away to college at Stillwater, to Oklahoma A&M at that time, which is now OSU. The requirement was over there to take ROTC. I took my ROTC, and I didn't mind the ROTC. I kind of liked it, as a matter of fact. A lot of marching and training, military training and stuff. The war was still going. The bomb hadn't been dropped yet. I talked to the people in school. I talked to the draft board, and they said, well, go on and go to college. You might be delayed long enough to finish the semester. Once you get started on that semester, we will probably let you finish. So I went ahead and went to school, and my best friend, same deal. We went over there, and the folks rented a bedroom in a lady's house. We lived in that. There weren't any fraternities open or anything at college. There weren't many men there, to tell you the truth, mostly girls. It was kind of nice. We had a lot of young ladies to look at and be around, but most of the guys were in the military. Anyway, about 2 months into that semester, the bomb dropped and they canceled the draft, so I got to go ahead and finish school. I went mostly through my ROTC, except right at the end. If you took all 4 of your years in the ROTC, then you had the opportunity, if you wanted, to go in the military and serve as an officer, but I think you had to stay in for 5 years after that. I really didn't want a military career, so I stopped just short of my 4 years of ROTC. There was no war right during that period.
You mentioned T. Boone Pickens. Did you know him back in those days?
I met him at college at Stillwater. And I didn't know him real well in college, but there weren't that many students over there. I knew him. Nice guy.
So then did you graduate from OSU?
Yes, sir. Graduated in mechanical engineering. In January of 51.
What happens to you then?
Well, I had a lot of options, count them up. One, I could go back and work on drilling rigs in the oil field again. I had this mechanical engineering degree, but guess what? The war had been over, and all these guys flooded back into the colleges, keeping at different levels, wherever they'd been when they had to go to the military. So a lot of graduates were graduating the same year I was from college. So the jobs were scarce. But I got offered this one job down in East Texas for Lufkin Foundry and Machine. They made these Lufkin semi-trailers that go down the road, and they also made oil field pumping units. My end goal, really, in my career was to be in the oil business in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's what I wanted to do. My granddad had made more money than anybody in the family, my mother's dad, who I was named after, and he was the most successful financially. So I said, my goal is I want to be in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I loved it over here with the water and the green trees and less red dirt blowing around. So I was always trying to work toward getting to Tulsa in the oil business. But I got this job offer in East Texas, which I took. I went down there as an engineer. We made Lufkin pumping units, those big horsehead jobs that are pumping up and down, pumping oil. So I thought, well, I'm sort of in the oil business this way. I got to spend some time in Odessa, Texas, working the field down there and stuff. I'd always worked on the drilling side of the oil business as a roughneck and everything. And this gave me an opportunity to work on the production side a little bit and learn about pumping rod loads and stresses and strains and how many barrels a day and how to gauge oil tanks and all that sort of thing. So it was a good experience. And then the draft board called me and said, you got to go, because Korea had come on.
That would have been what year?
The end of 51, 9 months after I'd gone to East Texas as an engineer. Yeah. Anyway, they said, you're going to have to go. So I said, oops, okay. I'd rather be an officer than I would an enlisted man. I had two things going for me. I had almost finished my ROTC, and I had a college degree in mechanical engineering. So I applied to the Air Force and the Navy. I was hoping for the Air Force. And nothing came through, and finally the draft board said, you have to go. So I went back to Perry and told the folks goodbye, and I went to Oklahoma City, took my physical, where I ran into a lot of other guys that I'd known in college, taking their physicals. Among those was our football star, Bob Fenimore from Stillwater, Oklahoma A&M, who'd been the quarterback the year that A&M beat OU, I think worse than they'd ever been beaten before. 60-0, I think, was the score in football that year. Anyway, Bob was out there. He failed the physical. He had bad legs or something. He was the best athlete in school. And I passed, of course. I passed.
Did you wonder, how could this athlete fail it?
Yeah, I was sort of wondering that. Yes, I was. So away I went to Fort Riley, Kansas, and 2 weeks after I got up there, I got this telegram from the Air Force said, okay, you've been appointed as second lieutenant in the Air Force, which I took to my commanding officer at the Army base. I was just a recruit, a draftee, not well thought of, not highly thought of, I can guarantee you. He looked at it and he said, well, that's interesting, bud, but he said, you're in the Army now, and handed me back the telegram. That was sort of the end of that till I got out of basic training up there. During that time, I'd wandered into Manhattan on a weekend pass, and I wandered into one of my fraternity house branches. All the guys were gone home for Christmas, but the door was open, so I walked in, and just the Army cot and things, and there was a television set. I'd never seen a television set before, and I reached down, I turned it on, so I saw television for the first time in my life.
In 51?
And a little break when I was in the Army camp.
Do you remember specifically what you saw?
No, I do not.
Right.
But I was fascinated by the television. Yeah, it was like a movie right there.
Did you get out of the Army and go with the Air Force?
As soon as I finished basic training, the Army did recognize the fact that I had a college degree and a lot of ROTC. Actually, while I was there at basic training, I got drafted with some guys who had never even seen anything ever to do with military, and they were raw and the stuff. I knew how to march and how to give orders, all that stuff that I'd learned in ROTC. I was almost a graduate ROTC, almost an officer. One morning, our training sergeant that lived in the barracks with us, he liked to drink a little bit. He'd been in the Army quite a while. And he was too drunk to get out of bed, and it was dark. We always had to get up and fall in outside in the dark. I was the tallest guy, so I was always on the end, and I led the squad there. It was dark, nobody could see him, but we had to always fall out of the barracks, line up, and give the morning report, all present accounted for, sir. I kind of liked this guy that was our training sergeant, and he just was too drunk to get out of bed. So we all fell in outside, and I could tell he wasn't going to come out, so I just jumped out there and took his place. I reported all present or accounted for, sir. When it was all over and we fell out, the officer called me over, and he said, where's the sergeant? I said, well, sir, I think he's sick this morning. He couldn't get out of bed. So I got kind of pushed ahead there, and so they transferred me to a fort right across the street from the Pentagon. And I was there for reassignment. I stayed there a little while.
When you were taking the place of that sergeant, somebody observed you.
They did, yeah.
And they saw a leadership ability.
Yes.
And because of that moment,
that helped.
That helped, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
And you got sent to D.C.
I did.
With the Army?
Still the Army, yes. Still in the Army. At that time, I was up there for reassignment, and I had some duties there at Fort Myers. It was kind of a specialized group that got sent there, guys with higher education and stuff like that. I had just a little spare time, and I'd gone around looking up a couple of congressmen and stuff and took my telegram and said, "Gentlemen, I'm supposed to be in the Air Force here. This is not coming around." Anyway, nothing could be done about that. And a really nice captain and another fellow came in one day and just interviewed me like we're interviewing here. And I thought, this is rather unusual for the Army. Usually they hand you the typed orders and that's where you're going. But he said, we're forming a small outfit in the Ordnance Corps, and we're going to test weaponry, and we're going to test all kind of military equipment stuff. Boy, my ears perked up. That was for me. I liked that. So I said, sure, I'd be glad to join you guys. I got transferred then up to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, where we were checking out all this new equipment stuff for the Army. I enjoyed that. I really did. For a while. We were there a little while.
Were you ever sent overseas?
Yes. We were going to test Army equipment, but a lot of the artillery stuff we had to test on the front lines. We were measuring muzzle velocities and other technical stuff with weaponry. We had to do this where they were firing from out there, and so we had to be up front lines or nearby. We were working on anti-aircraft artillery and everything. I got a tank driver's license. I went to radio school. I got a radio repairman's license. I wanted to learn everything I could in the military, so I went to every school I go to. But anyway, we got orders to go to Korea right when the big Korean thing was roaring on. There were only 15 of us in this outfit, and we had this truck full of technical equipment and all kind of electronic stuff. I had a good used car again that I'd bought with me up there, and this was East Coast. I called the folks and said, would you mind coming up here and driving my car home, and let's go to New York for the weekend. I got them a room at the Waldorf Astoria. They'd never been to New York, and I always stayed at the YMCA when I go up there because that was free. I went to New York on a weekend. We had some fun doing that, and then they'd said goodbye and drove my car home. And lo and behold, the weekend before we were supposed to leave for Korea, we had a weekend pass. Came back Monday morning to go, and the captain and I were the only two guys that reported back into the company. The other guys were all gone. What in the world happened? They were World War II veterans, and they'd gone to their congressman or somebody in Washington, and since they'd already been in combat in Europe, they got excused from going to combat in Korea, which was a good thing for them. But then we didn't have a whole outfit to take to Korea, so we had to retrain a bunch of new guys. I got promoted right then. At that point, I got to the top enlisted man in the company, since there was only one of me. And I was acting first sergeant. I wore the stripes and had all the authority and all that stuff. We got a bunch of new guys, and the captain said, well, we got to train someplace. We need to be where the Army is, so there's an Army of Occupation in Europe. Let's go there. So he got his orders, and we went to Germany as a part of the Army of Occupation, where we traveled with our equipment all over Germany, and we were checking equipment and measuring muzzle velocities and doing all the technical stuff for the anti-aircraft and the artillery and all that all over Europe.
You probably enjoyed that.
I did, enjoyed it a lot. Yeah, it was great, and I spent the rest of my time, never had to go to combat in Korea that way.
Wow.
It was wintertime. I wasn't looking forward to going to snowy Korean battlefield.
But it was even winter in Germany.
Oh, it was, yeah, but the shooting was over in Germany, so that was good.
You served your time then with the Army.
Finished out my time in the Army.
And you came out of the Army what year?
Well, let's see. I was in the Army 2 years. 2 years, so I had to serve. 53.
So you came out of the Army in 1953.
Yes.
You are married today. Is meeting your wife any part of these years?
No. I had dated a number of girls in college, but I didn't get married or anything right before I went away. I had a girlfriend, but gosh, we were apart for 2 years. I didn't see her, so she got other interests, and so did I, really. No, I had no attachments at that time. When I got out of the Army, I, of course, came home to Perry and saw my folks. My dad said, what are your plans? And I said, well, I don't think I want to go back to Lufkin Foundry down there, because I found out that my boss had been with the company for 20 years, and he was only making $750 a month, and I had higher ambitions than that. I said, I don't believe I want to do that. I want to be more free for some entrepreneurship. When I had taken mechanical engineering and then gone into the oil field, I knew that I had not learned enough about the scientific end, technical end of the oil and gas business, because they didn't offer that over at Stillwater in the engineering school. My dad said, well, you've always kind of admired going to Tulsa University or to OU. He said, why don't you go down and get a petroleum engineering degree? You got the GI Bill to help you now. I said, oh, gosh, go back to school. I don't know. After working and then being in the Army, I might be a little too senior to go back to college with the college kids. I finally decided that would be the best thing for me to do, so I enrolled in OU. That was midsummer when all that was going on. I had about a month before semester started, and he said, well, what do you want to do? I had saved up a little money when I was in the Army. Unlike most of the guys, I didn't play poker, so I came out of the military with a little money. I had $1,500. I said, I've always wanted to go to California. Never been to California. So I put the top down on my old beat-up Ford convertible, and away I went to California for a month.
You're about 25 years old.
At 24, I think, yeah.
Okay. You did a little trip to California.
I did, and sort of looked that over, and I decided right then that I had arrived in California too late. They already found the big oil fields. L.A. was built up like crazy. Hollywood, I didn't particularly care for that environment. Beverly Hills, they were way too wealthy for me, so I didn't see anything for me out there. I could have gone to work in an aircraft factory as an engineer. I always loved airplanes, but I didn't think I wanted to be working in a drafting table in Boeing or someplace. Mm-hmm. So I came back and went to OU.
4 years there at OU?
No. I got my degree in 1 year. 1 year because I already had one engineering degree.
Yes,
I needed to add the petroleum courses.
Okay.
I made a D in calculus in mechanical engineering. Like I said, I'd always been a little behind in math ever since my country school. While I was in California traveling, I got a job out there as a used car salesman to fill my time, try to make a little money. I always tried to work somewhere every day. I was taking a correspondence course in calculus while I was out there, so every night I'd sit down and do my lesson. I think I really learned how to study at that time, better than ever before. I made an A in that correspondence course. By doing that correspondence course, I was able to fill all my other required hours in 1 year if I went straight through summers and everything. I didn't have enough money to support myself. My dad slowed down some. He wasn't making a lot of money. So there was a rig running around on the edge of Norman. I saw the lights out there at night. I went out there and said, you guys need anybody? I said, I got to work at night. So the old boy, he said, yeah, we need a man. So I got on out there, and I was working on that drilling rig at night, and I was trying to do my homework in between trips and other things. So I'd go to work at 4 and get off at midnight. Usually it was 3:30, and we'd get off at 11:30 or something. I didn't have any social life at all down there. Then I'd get up and go to class and back to work again. But I did meet a young lady down there anyway, who I was able to spend a little time with. Later on, we got married.
And what was her name?
Diane Estes. She'd been runner-up for Miss Oklahoma and some stuff, and I was pretty infatuated with her.
What year would that have been?
That was 1954, or maybe.
Did you have children with Diane?
Yes, 2 sons. They're 2 fine guys, I'll tell you that. One is a grandfather now, and he works with me. Diane and I were married for 17 years. Then we divorced, and I was single for about 3 years, I guess, and I met on a blind date Lee, my present wife. We've been married 42 years. Diane, my first wife, lives in West Tulsa. She's pretty good health.
You get your petroleum engineering degree at OU. Then
I had some opportunities because I had learned how to study, I think, on that correspondence course, or maybe I was older. I really, really wanted to know what I needed to know to get in the oil business. So I really paid attention in geology class and engineering class because I really, really was interested in it. So I made very good grades down there. I made a couple of honorary fraternities. So I had some opportunities when I graduated. I had an opportunity to go to work for Humble in West Texas and a couple of other oil companies. All those major oil companies said, well, you got to go into our training program. I said, that's great. What does that consist of? They said, well, you got to work on a rig as a roughneck. I said, oh, my gosh, I've been doing that in every spare minute in school, from high school up through this year in college. I was working on this rig. It was on the edge of Norman, and then it moved down to Lindsay, and I was driving a long ways, still working on that rig. I said, I'm really not too enthused about working on a rig again with 2 college degrees. So my uncle in Bristow, always knew him, didn't know him well. He was connected with, I think there were like 47 shareholders in this little oil company. One of the shareholders being John Phillips, who was, I think, a nephew of Frank Phillips. Another one was Ed Smith, a very prominent businessman here in Tulsa. And a couple of other gentlemen, really a good business bunch. And my uncle had a little tiny piece of this company. As part of that company, he comes into this story at this point. His name was Ralph Kirchner, R.R. Kirchner. I got to tell you a little bit about him. I think he served a little while in World War I, and then he got out and got interested in the oil field. In those days, the way you drilled an oil well was with cable tools. You picked a bit up, you dropped it, picked a bit up and dropped it, and it just kind of broke up the ground. Then you put some water in there and bailed out the broken up cuttings and stuff and brought them out in a baler. That was called cable tool drilling. That's the way all the wells were drilled in those days, water wells and oil wells. A little hard to control when you got into a high-pressure zone because it might blow out over the top like Spindle Top and all those other pictures you see, the old oil wells blowing out over the wooden derricks and things. Well, he was that era. My dad also worked in that era in the oil field as a hand, too, to make a living. Anyway, my uncle was a cable tool contractor, and these fellas in Tulsa, part of these Woolaroc Oil Field gentlemen, had started this company up here called Unit Rig. It had developed into a pretty good-sized company because there was a demand in the oil field for expansion and business. They developed building this drawworks, which is the mechanical part that runs all the cables and the traveling blocks and all that stuff that goes up and down to the mast and all that. They built that stuff in West Tulsa. So they said, we better build a test rig to see if this all works, because this is rotary drilling, not cable tool drilling. Rotary drilling was just coming on in those days. Howard Heath's father, the rotary drilling bit, that was just getting going in those days. So they said, Ralph, my uncle, they called him Brick because he had red hair. He was the red-headed brother of the 3 of my dads. Why don't you operate our first test rig? We're going to build a rotary rig. Why don't you operate that? We'll learn from this test rig. So he agreed to do that. He didn't know anything about rotary drilling either, but he learned. They built a second one. They were mainly a little oil company, though. They were trying to find oil and gas production, which they had. They had an engineer that worked for them. I've forgotten his name. But he'd gotten sick or something, and he had quit just about the time I graduated from school. I don't know why, but I think my uncle called my dad and said, do you think he'd be interested in coming up here and working for us? He's got 2 engineering degrees, and he's worked on rigs. You think he'd be interested? My dad said, well, maybe. Why don't you call him? And so he called me. Here was my chance to get closer to Tulsa. He was officing in Bristow. I thought, well, that's not Tulsa where I ultimately want to be, but it's closer. So I came up and I said, yes. The salary was, I think, $450 a month. I didn't mention my first job as an engineer. I've been making about $400 a month as a roughneck. Working there at school, my first engineering job was $250 a month. And I thought, boy, this is really going uphill. That's all I was making in East Texas. I was about starved to death down there. So I thought it probably doesn't have the future that working for a Humble or somebody like that does. But I came up here with my uncle. He said, okay, what you're going to do is just ride with me and do everything I do, learn everything I do, which was wonderful, actually. He was a very stern master, though. When I was going to move down there to Bristow, I rented an apartment for $40 a month, I think. But he said, you got to live close to the office. I don't want you living over 1 mile from the office, because he said, we're running 24 hours a day with these rigs, and you got to be ready to come to the office or go out those rigs at any time of day or night. I said, okay. I was on call 24 hours a day.
And this was with Woolaroc?
That was called Woolaroc Oil Company. They named it after Woolaroc Ranch up there.
Because it was founded by John Phillips.
Well, John Phillips and Ed Smith, all these fellows went together. I don't know, there's a group of them here in Tulsa. I never did know them all.
Did you ever meet the Phillips?
Oh, yeah, I met John Phillips. Yeah, he was a very nice young man.
The nephew of Frank Phillips,
yes,
founder of Phillips Petroleum Company.
That's correct.
Your time there at Woolaroc, how long did that continue?
8 years, actually. Ralph was, I called him Ralph, the rest of the people called him Brick. He was older at that time, and he had a little heart trouble. My job was to get out and see about the rigs, and actually, he had to keep the rigs busy on contracts, and we could drill a well. It would take us 30 to 60 days to drill a well in those days, depending on how deep. It was kind of a job staying ahead of it with jobs, lining them up, having them come up just when we want them, not too far away, so the move wouldn't be too long. It was wearing him down pretty much, and he was supposed to be getting more and more production, so he pretty much turned the rig operation over to me and said, keep him busy, and he introduced me to all his contacts, which was great.
During that time you were there, were you thinking, I'd like to own my own oil company?
Absolutely.
Drilling?
Absolutely, because I'd worked for my dad on the farm, and I wanted to get away from working for my dad as soon as I could. My dad was a great guy. I loved him dearly, and he was a wonderful, wonderful parent. But that working for relatives is just not a thing that I absolutely love, because it seems like you got all the blame and none of the credit. Mm-hmm. If something went wrong, it surely was my fault. But if something went right, it usually was not my accomplishment. Right. So I couldn't develop any credit. I couldn't develop anything there working for him. I was just the nephew there.
Right. So you decided to leave.
Yeah, even though he was a wonderful teacher, yes, and a wonderful man, and taught me everything he could possibly teach me, I wanted to be responsible. I wanted my own deal going, and I wanted to live in Tulsa. During that time, I had been dating my college sweetheart in Oklahoma City. We got married, and she moved to Bristow. She was a big-town Oklahoma City girl, and she thought when our first son was coming up on 6 years old, we ought to be in the Tulsa school system. She liked it better. Bristow was a great town, but we actually bought a little house up here in Tulsa, and I commuted back and forth to Bristow, and we got our son in first grade up here.
But then you were interested in your own company.
I wanted my own company desperately. So I started going around to some contacts I'd met with my uncle and others. I tried to meet everybody I could that was in the oil business. By this time, my granddad had died, so I had to pretty much go out on my own and meet all these people. I had never borrowed any money. I tried to borrow a little money to buy a used boat when my wife was pregnant with my second son. I wanted to refurbish this boat, use it for the summer, which I did, but I went to the bank and I said, I want to borrow $1,500. They said, sure, we'll be glad to do that if your Uncle Brick will co-sign it. I said, what? And they said, yeah, if he'll co-sign it, because you don't have any line of credit. I said, well, thank you a lot, and I left. And I said, there's no way in hell I'm going to do that. That was a Republican bank, and my uncle was a strong Republican. And he was past district governor of Rotary Club and all that good stuff, so he was the man. Anyway, I went down to the Democrat bank and told them what I wanted to do. They said, sure, we'll loan you the money.
In Bristow?
Yeah, so that started my line of credit right there. And I paid them back, too. But they had a good contact with the Bank of Oklahoma up here and some others. I said, I really want to get my own drilling company, I think, because I want my own oil company, but oil wells, you got to raise the money to drill them or borrow the money. I didn't want to borrow the money. You got to have a deal, promote it, get the well drilled, then you got to sell the oil, and then you got to wait for the people that bought the oil to pay you. So that's a long time lag, and I didn't have any money. I had $10,000 that I had saved up. I guess I need to tell you where I got the $10,000 to. That's kind of interesting.
Yes.
Woolaroc Oil Company was a tightly held private little oil company. They had awarded me a little award stock, $1,500 worth, that I had. The only market for it was to sell it back to them. And they didn't want to buy it because that was holding me to the company. Well, the lawyer next door rented us the space for a little office down there in Bristow. He had always kind of wanted to work a little wedge into that company some way. They had 3 offices in that building. And I said, would you be interested in buying this stock? I said, the only market is right next door back to them. He said, yeah, I'd buy that. I was going to leave anyway. I said, I'll sell you this if I can go ahead and put the rest of my deal together, if you would. I'd always been interested in airplanes. I had a $700 ski boat that we were drilling a well in the middle of the Cushing Airport, right between the triangle runways over there, built for the military. We were drilling a well right in the middle of the airport. We had a breakdown and had to go to Oklahoma City to get some parts. The guy at the airport said, why don't I fly you down this little Piper Pacer here and get your part, you can come back. Wasn't a very big part, so I was impressed with that time savings of flying to Oklahoma City back. So I said, I got to get me an airplane. He said, I'll sell you this airplane over here. It was $700 for that airplane. And I had a $700 ski boat. I didn't have any money, but said, would you be interested in trading? He said, I've been wanting a ski boat, so he traded me that $700 airplane for my $700 ski boat. This airplane didn't have any radios, didn't have an electric starter. You spun the prop. It was an Aeronautica Chief. My uncle didn't like airplanes much, and I was working for him. I said, well, I traded for this airplane, and it's so light the wind may blow it away. But he taught me how to fly, the guy over there at Cushing, while we were doing that well. I couldn't get my license in it because it didn't have an electric system, no radio. You need a radio, and you need to be able to navigate electronically, VORs and stuff. But anyhow, I did some flying around in that thing. I was real interested in airplanes. I got to have a better airplane. So I had this $1,500 from that stock deal. And there was an old dentist down in, I think it was in Holdenville, I believe Boone's hometown. He'd gotten into some kind of a situation on a trip to Alaska in his V-tail Bonanza, where he'd gotten in some bad weather, and he got all disoriented. When he got out into the clear, the clouds, he was aimed straight down at the ground and not too far from it, and he pulled back hard. He really overstressed the airplane. He bent it, but the airplane stayed together, and he got it on the ground. Somehow or other, I guess he flew it back from Alaska, but it was bent from overstressing, and he wanted to sell it. Normally, Bonanzas in those days were going for $40,000 or $50,000, but he had a very limited market. Somebody would buy a bent airplane. That limited market was me. He sold it to me for $1,500. So he was rid of that bent airplane. I was afraid to fly in it too, but I had a friend that was a Bonanza pilot, and I said, this thing's bent, but would you go down with me and get that airplane? I think I got an airplane dealer in Oklahoma City that'll buy it. He said, yeah, we'll pick a real quiet, still morning, and we'll go get that thing. And we flew it down to Oklahoma City to this fellow, and I sold it to him for $10,000. So I had $10,000 in this airplane trade.
When you said bent, how do you mean bent?
Well, right behind the seats where you sit, the fuselage had a big concave place in it where the fuselage had bent. It didn't bend the tail any. V-tail Bonanza's got these V's at the back like this for controls. One of the wings, right at the root of the wing where it joins the fuselage, there are some big spars that go through there. I think he was going 300 miles an hour when he said he was pointed straight down. It scared the living heck out of him. He never wanted to set foot in that airplane again. But it had bent this one wing up just a little bit, and there was a big wrinkle going right back on this upper skin of this wing. Of course, this other guy and I looked over some inspection place and looked at the spar and everything. It wasn't cracked, but it was definitely bent under there. It was repairable with a good mechanic. It had some other wrinkles around on it where it had gone almost to the point of failure, but it didn't come apart.
But anyway, that gave you $10,000.
It did, yeah.
And so what did we do with that $10,000?
I stuck that way back deep in the bank. Then I started going around to the banks here in Tulsa, of which I'd known some of the bankers. I'd met them at various functions. Mac McClintock here in town was the president of the First National Bank, and he and a couple other fellows had started a drilling company as a sideline. I think it was not a financial success. It had gone under. But anyway, I thought, well, Frank's had experience in the drilling business. He'll surely see how great I am at running these rigs and loan me the money so I can buy some rigs. Rigs were selling for about $50,000 a piece. Knew they cost probably $500,000 or something like that. And they were selling real cheap because there was a surplus of them at that time.
Let's establish the years that we're talking about.
That was 1963.
Okay.
They were going real cheap. 10 cents on the dollar or less. Phillips had sold all their company rigs. They had most of the oil companies had sold. A lot of them owned drilling rigs so they could drill their own wells. They were all selling out, and competition was really fierce. But I'd been able to keep Woolaroc rigs busy, which they called unit drilling, by the way, because it was the experimental rig from Unit Rig out here, the first one and the second one, really.
So that's where the name came from.
That's where the name came from. Well,
Unit Rig.
Well, the same guys that owned Woolaroc owned Unit Rig out here, Unit Rig and Equipment. Mac McClintock was very nice, but he said, we tried the drilling business and we failed. He said, we're not going to loan money to a startup drilling company. Of course, Helmrich had been going. They were quite good. And we had Reading and Bates. We had some very successful drilling companies here in town, but they'd gone beyond the startup stage. They were well established and good companies. But I was a startup guy with only $10,000. They couldn't see me making it. So there were rig auctions about every week someplace. And that's the way we kept our rigs going at the company I worked for then. I'd make it to all the auctions. Ralph, Uncle Brick, didn't go to them. Mostly I did. And I bought all the parts because I knew all the parts to the rigs. We could buy good parts that were hardly used at all. Some of them brand new for just nothing. It cost more to haul them home than what they'd sell for. So we kept the rigs going with used drill pipe, used everything. All kind of used motors, pumps, all that stuff.
You bought all these at auction.
Yeah.
Because these rigs obviously weren't operating and people were giving up the business.
That's right.
The bank even failed. I think you're about 36, 37 years old. What made you believe that you, a startup, could be successful?
Because I just knew if I was successful, that would give me some cash flow to start getting in oil and gas deals. I could eventually get in the oil and gas business. And I felt very confident that I could do this because I'd been keeping these other rigs busy for Woolaroc. And because my uncle had kind of gotten sickly, I had to do all the traveling, all the sales and everything. By that time, I'd developed some pretty good friendly sales techniques for keeping the rigs busy. People would call me and they would use our rigs. My name got tied to their unit drilling company, which had 2 rigs. Finally, we bought a third one because I was getting a lot of business. We could work so cheap because I had a little advantage over a lot of the competitors. A lot of the competitors were guys who'd come up as a roughneck, and they became a driller and a tool pusher, and they'd found some way to get enough money to buy a rig and things. They had all the working knowledge, but they didn't have the technical knowledge that I'd learned in a couple of engineering degrees. So I was able to do a couple of things better than they could do. They were good old boys and everything, but for instance, they'd get the pipe stuck in the hole and they thought the hole caved in on them or something. And I'd learned that differential pressure sticking was the thing. I learned that in school, believe it or not. It's just like you put a bathtub stopper, you put a stopper over that hole, the fluid won't flow, but it's kind of hard to pick the stopper up once you get it on there. Well, that's what happened when the drill pipe got against the wall of a hole. That wall was taking a little fluid. The fluid would squeeze out of the mud and leave the mud as a cake there, sort of a seal, and that drill pipe would get over there, and it would stick. And if it stuck for several hundred feet, you could figure the square inches of contact against the wall of the hole, and it was a big number. You know, if you got 1,500 pounds per square inch or something there, and you multiply it times the number of inches up and down the hole where that contact was, that was a heck of a strong seal, and you could not pull that pipe out of the hole. The only way to get it loose was change the differential pressure or to put a lubricant in there that would seat between the seal and the steel pipe. I learned how to get that stuck pipe loose just by spotting oil, and everybody spotted oil after that. It was somebody else's idea. I had learned it in school. I can't claim credit for that, but we started using it. Nobody else was using that method. Everybody does it now. Stuff like that. We just had less trouble.
So you were trying to borrow money.
Yeah, and Uncle Brick had all the credit, and I had none, which he had earned it. He had earned it. He was a wonderful man. Yeah, I couldn't borrow any money in Tulsa.
So then where did you go?
I got to know all of our competition at these auctions because all of our competition was out there buying equipment. One of our strong competitors was Don Bodard, Bodard Drilling out of Shawnee. Don was a very charismatic, friendly guy. Everybody liked him. All the competitors used to get together and have dinner and a couple of drinks and things at these auctions, so we got to know each other pretty well. It was kind of a game as well as business. I was telling Don what I was trying to do, and I said, I need to get some credit. I want to buy a couple of rigs at auction. What they do, they'd sell these rigs piecemeal, each individual piece at these auctions. Then they'd add all those pieces up and offer it as a whole rig to whoever wanted to buy the whole rig. Sometimes they'd go as a whole rig. Then everybody that thought they'd bought pieces didn't get any pieces because it went as a whole rig. And I was going to do that. I was going to buy a whole rig or two, try to get two to start in business.
So you told Don about it?
Yeah, I was talking to Don about it, and he said, you want to get together and go to my banker? I got credit over there. I really didn't want a partner, but I could tell this guy knew what he was doing, and I could see that's the only way I was going to get it done anytime soon. I said yes. He said, well, I want 51%. And I said, I want 51%. And I said, and I want to run it. And I want it to be named my name, not your name. because he'd had other partners, guys that he'd put in business as well as his own company. He'd been very successful at that. He chose good guys. He'd get a rig or two or three with him. He'd had Bodard and Cossey, Bodard and Hale, Bodard and I don't know, a number of other deals. They'd run them a few years and then settle out as a going company. He did pretty well at that. I was a little different than the other guys because I had some technical education to go along with it, plus I was a veteran. He was a veteran. He was in the South Pacific. We got along good. We finally settled on 50-50. He said, okay, I'll go 50-50. But he said, I'd like for my accountant, who was an independent CPA there named Don Cook in Shawnee, it was Philly & Cook Accounting Company. I said, not as a shareholder, right? He said, yeah, just a third director. Naturally, it was his accountant, so I figured he'd side with him on any decisions if we ever had a problem. But, we never got into a problem that we had to get into that kind of a deal. But anyway, we went to his banker. Interest was pretty high in those days, but he always paid the banker 7%. He said, that's the deal. It's 7%. If interest rates go lower than that, we're still paying 7%. If interest rates go higher than that, we're still paying 7%. We borrowed it on that basis. We both signed the note, and I had to pledge everything I had. The unusual part, my mother died by that time. My dad was older and living by himself up there on that farm where he wanted to live and have a good time. But by odd coincidence, I had inherited half of that farm. When my granddad died, he still owned the farm that we lived on. My mother had died, so I was the heir apparent. So my aunt in Kansas City and I inherited the farm. I inherited half the farm and half of her house she was living in Kansas City. She said, well, I don't want half the farm. I said, I don't want half the house in Kansas City. So we just traded. They were about the same value. So at that time, I owned 100% of the farm my dad was living on. I had to pledge that farm to get that loan down there.
Put it up for collateral.
That's right. And had I gone broke in the business, my dad would have been living on a farm taken away by the bank. And, that wouldn't have been a very comfortable position for me.
It had to make you a little nervous.
By that time, I already had a wife and 2 kids, too, so...
Yeah, this was a big thing for you to
borrow.
It
was a cannot fail. Failure is not an option.
And how much money were you borrowing?
$160,000. That bought 3 drilling rigs. When I told my uncle what we were going to do, he got together with his other guys. He'd suffered a pretty bad heart attack by that time, and he was sort of down a little bit. I was running everything with the drilling company. They were still doing oil and gas stuff, but he had a lot of help with that. He said, if you're leaving, I don't think we want to keep these rigs. We'll sell you these rigs. To use his terms, he said, we'll sell you these rigs, but we're goddamn sure not going to finance them for you. Sure not going to finance them for you. I said, well, it's a going company. I know all the guys. My name has kind of become connected with that name. I said, that would be a big advantage. But I said, your name is also real connected with that. All the dog houses and all the equipment was painted with unit drilling on the side. And I said, I'd be getting a going company that way instead of buying rigs at auction. He didn't think too much of Don because he'd always been a competitor of his. My partner-to-be there, he didn't think that would work. But anyway, I said, well, could we take part of the name and change it a little bit so it wouldn't be exactly the same? So Don and I started a new company. We changed the last part of it. It used to be Unit Drilling Company, but we changed it slightly. So here we started with a new company then. Don and I were the co-founders of this new company that we called Unit Drilling. It was Unit Drilling CO, Unit Drilling Company spelled out. I've forgotten exactly which.
But it was close enough to Unit Drilling as it had been, but you just changed it a little bit to be your own.
Just a little bit, yes. We closed that deal.
Did you locate the operation to Tulsa then?
Yes. I immediately came to Tulsa, and where's the best place for business? Well, the Petroleum Club was going downtown at that time in the Petroleum Club building, and a couple of my friends said, well, why don't you put your offices here in this building? Because all the guys come here for lunch. You see all your potential customers and everybody. So I did. I rented a 3-room office down there, and my wife at that time was my first secretary receptionist. By the time we were there 17 years, we finally had to leave that building because we'd taken all the spare space there was. We were full and running over, and the employees, we had to pay a lot of money for their parking and things. I had too many guys going upstairs for lunch at company expense at the Petroleum Club, so we came down here to this building.
How many wells would you have drilled in your first year?
I don't know that number offhand, but we kept the rigs working quite steadily. As we got a little money ahead, we added more rigs. I was pretty darn good at keeping those rigs busy. I tell you, I was keeping 12 rigs busy when we finally took it public. We operated until 1979 as a private company. By that time, I had credit, or I had credit as me because I was running the company. Don had his companies down there, and I said, let me run this one. We'll meet all the time. We'll talk every day or two. There'll be no secrets. We became great friends and great partners.
Well,
we're good, and he stayed out of my hair.
Didn't you purchase then Falcon Seaboard Drilling Company?
Not exactly Falcon. As the years went by, we purchased all of Parker Drilling Company's U.S. land rigs. We purchased all of Service Drilling Company's U.S. land rigs. We purchased all of Red Hickman's U.S. land rigs. We purchased all of 2 or 3 other companies that were all our one-time competitors out there in western Oklahoma. And
yeah, you purchased 4 rigs from Falcon Seaboard Drilling.
And as the company grew later, we finally got up to a high of 132 rigs years later.
Wow.
So,
and the day you paid off that $150,000...
Yeah, we never really paid it off. We just kept borrowing more money and buying more rigs, but we always had money in the bank. We never had a year we didn't make money, and I was most proud of the first year because my uncle didn't think I was going to make it. When he sold me the rigs, he thought he'll learn a thing or two on this deal. And I think they were really glad to get rid of the drilling rigs so they'd go ahead and run their oil company. I think they thought maybe they were putting one over on us because they thought we'd fail. My granddad was still alive up here, and he said, oh, don't ever become a drilling contractor. You'll go broke doing that. My dad said, don't become a drilling contractor. You go broke at that.
They didn't think the business was going to
They didn't
grow.
think that you could survive it because most of the guys had gone in and had gone broke because they usually got in trouble some way or other. If you lost a well that blew out or something like that, it was your fault. You could get in real serious.
We're talking now about the 70s now that you are starting to...
Yes.
What I'm trying to get back to is the land that you had tied the note to, your land.
Yeah.
When was that mortgage burned, as we say?
In 1979.
Oh, really?
From 1963 to 1979, I went to bed every night trying to sleep, thinking, boy, if I go broke, my dad's going to be homeless. And so am I.
All that time?
All that time, yeah.
Wow.
The first year we were in business, I was so proud because I was really sweating it, and boy, we did everything. First, I had to go out and tell the guys in the field working on the rigs who they were working for, hoping they'd stay. I went out to them, and I said, fellas, Don Bodard and I have bought these rigs, and we'd like for you to keep on working for us. We're not going to change the name very much, but it's going to be a new company. And I said, we don't have enough money. We've got $20,000. He put up 10 and I put up 10. I said, we've only got $20,000 to make the first payroll. And I'm going to have to get paid for the jobs we're on before I can make the second payroll. And I said, if you'll stay with me, I'll sincerely appreciate it, and we're going to try to make it. If we can't, why, we can't. By that time, I had an airplane with electrical system, and when we finished the first well, we were working for a very nice gentleman out of Dallas. I put the invoice together immediately when we finished the well. I got in that airplane. I flew that invoice to Dallas, and I walked in his office, and I said, if there's any way you could, sir, we'd really like to get paid for this well. If you're satisfied and you're ready to pay us. He said, well, I'd do that. And he paid us, and I brought that money home. I had enough money to make the second payroll, and it went on like that. We made $100,000 net the first year, and I was so proud. I slept a little easier, and then every year after that we made money. We kept making money, and over those years as we made money, I kept taking a little interest in wells and trying to get a little production going along because I eventually wanted to convert this thing into an oil company.
Because you called it then Unit Petroleum.
We eventually got to that, yes, sir. At first, I wasn't making enough money to pay the big salaries for a really great geologist. I bought deals from geologists, and we'd take a little interest and try to get a drilling contract and take an interest in the well and get a little production that way. So we had little dabs of production coming on. Then I started taking deals from geologists and said, okay, I want to take your deal, I'll get you an override, and I'm going to sell this to other people and clear myself an interest, and we're going to promote deals like that. I didn't have the people really to operate. I knew how to operate fairly well, but I wasn't a really professional oil and gas operator. So we had other people operating those days. But we were trying to put together all the parts of an oil company and finally bring it together. I finally made a deal with a geologist. I couldn't afford to pay his big salary he was making where he was working, but I said, I'll give you an overriding royalty, which means he got a fraction of the oil and gas income from the well, in addition to his salary. The salary was low, so he worked to find oil and gas because he wanted more oil and gas coming so he could make a bigger override. I made some geologists multimillionaires. Some retired living in La Jolla. Well, anyway, we were starting to do pretty well promoting these deals, and I'm still trying to keep all these rigs busy by myself. I still didn't have a salesman. But people were calling us in those days because we were doing a good job. As I got acquainted, I didn't have to do quite so much selling, if you will. I had a group of private investors that were taking a piece of these deals. Then I got this relationship with the first geologist, and he could produce more deals than I had the money to drill. So I said, well, gee, I got to raise a private fund or something here to drill these deals. Through a local broker here I met, he said, well, why don't you call a guy with our company in New York, happened to be with Merrill Lynch, and we raised a $10 million drilling fund, private drilling fund. They looked at our success that we'd done, just putting these deals together on a basis. I said, we will raise $10 million for you.
So you went to New York.
Yeah, I didn't know a soul in New York except this fellow up there.
You know what I'm thinking about? Your mother knew that one day you'd be going to New York.
She had me all prepped for that. Yes,
right.
She did.
So you go to New
York.
So
I thank God for wonderful parents. I do. I had marvelous parents and grandparents. They were tough. They made me work, and I was so glad of that.
You go to New York, and this is a whole new ball game to you now.
Oh, yeah.
To get on the New York Stock Exchange.
Well, yeah. I'd known New York a little bit since I was around up there broke, staying at the YMCA on my days off from the military. Well, I didn't spend any extra money, I'll tell you. I was very tight with my money. I never borrowed any money. I was always, if I didn't have it, I didn't spend it.
Well, then tell us the $10 million. How did that come about?
Well, I went up there and I called on their people and said, okay, here's what we've been doing. We got a pretty good track record. We found this much oil and gas. We've got these wells going, and the money's coming back pretty fast. We're getting pretty fast payout on these wells. We discovered some wells down in Chickasha, down in that area, pretty darn good wells. They said, well, that looks pretty interesting. I think we've got some venture capital people up here. And there were other companies raising drilling funds around that we were running our rigs for, so I knew all of those guys and knew kind of how they were doing it. So I was sort of following their lead. And by that time, I had qualified for YPO, Young Presidents Organization. You had to have 100 employees or over, and you had to make $1 million a year gross in your company and be under 40. And you could become a member of YPO. Well, that threw me in with a whole bunch of pretty sophisticated young guys. Some of them were running public companies. Some of them were inherited companies. Some of them were hired CEOs and all this sort of thing. And it gave me a wonderful exposure to people and how they'd done this and done that and everything. So that was great. So I went off to New York, and they said, let's come down and take a look. They came down. They looked at all of our stuff. They said, you're pretty small. We'll give it a go. We'll raise $10 million for you. We did very well with our $10 million. Before the year was out, we'd spent the $10 million wisely. Out of that, we got a free ride on a part of it. So we were building a fractional oil company over here. At that time, we got into operating. We had the people, I'd hired the engineers, and I always tried to hire somebody smarter than I was, because no use hiring anybody dumber than I was. I was dumb enough for the whole bunch. I couldn't say the advantage of hiring anybody unless they were smarter than I was. Smarter by being more knowledgeable on what we were trying to do. We were doing okay. They said, well, how about a $25 million one? Great. At that time, they had me out making the rounds, going doing dog and pony shows in Denver and New York. Finally, we got to go into London, Germany, and other places. So I was a speaker. I was not a public speaker. I was still an engineer and not too swift at the public speaking. But anyway, I guess it was real. So I said, here's what we're doing, guys. And at this time, we started investing our own money in our own deals. We always did anyway, what we could afford. I said, it may work, may not, but here's what we're doing. After we did the $25 million one, they said, well, let's go for a $50 million one. So they raised the 50 real quick. I mean, we made the rounds, and I was the lead horse, I guess, and raised the $50 million. Then I went to Bodard. We were both flying these V-tail Bonanzas that time. These weren't bad. These were good airplanes. But I said, somebody might stick their nose in the dirt with one of these, and if either you or I die, we're going to have to sell the companies for the other guy to pay estate taxes. I said, what would you think of taking it public? And he didn't like that idea at all. He built these companies up and then sold them. That was his MO always. And he was not really in favor of that because he had not had all this Wall Street exposure that I'd had by that time in these drilling fund things. And I said, well, I think you can have a little money. You can sell a little bit of it. You can sell part of the company. You can sell whatever you want to when you want to sell it, pretty much with SEC restrictions. And I said, you can gradually sell down and change your estate around or whatever you want to do, and I can do the same. He got like that idea, so I said, let's take her public. Then was a problem because we're still pretty small, and public companies need to be pretty good size. So he said, let me call our guy in New York. And that happened to be Payne Weber, and Payne Weber sent a man down named Bud Quell, fine gentleman. First of all, Merrill Lynch had raised all this other money for us, but they said, you're too small for us to take public. You're not a big enough deal. Bud looked at what we're doing, and he really liked it. Payne Weber said, okay, you are small, but we'll do it. They took us public, and we were supposed to come out at a certain price. Of course, we came out at a higher price than what we expected to. At that moment, when we were public, then I could get my name off of that giant note. What I thought was a giant note is nothing to what business is today. And I've never been in debt since then. So that was 1979. I've never been in personal debt. The company has its debt, but it is responsible for that debt solely. The executives of Unit are not responsible individually with their personal wealth for the debt they have.
So you then began trading on the New York Stock Exchange?
Yes, we began trading. We said, well, we're half oil and gas exploration and we're half drilling company. By that time, we'd gotten quite a lot more production, and we were operating all this production from the drilling funds. So we had been able to put together a staff of engineers and geologists and people like that were on, then no more overrides, but on salaries and like a regular company does it. We went public under the name of Unit Drilling and Exploration Company. It was UD&E, over the counter. We remained over the counter until we kept growing. And in 1981, we got big enough to get on the New York. And I went to Don. I said, what do you think, Don? Let's go on to New York. We're barely big enough, but we can get on there. And then we're really public. We had to meet other qualifications to be qualified for the New York Exchange, but in 1981 we went up there and rang the bell, and we're on the New York Stock Exchange.
How exciting.
It was
That had
exciting.
to be fun.
It was exciting.
And you had, I think at that time, about 28 rigs?
I was pretty proud of myself. Oklahoma, Perry farm boy.
Yes.
There was a New York ringing the bell.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it wasn't easy.
Yeah, it's a risk, I'll tell you that.
You did, indeed. You did, indeed.
Had a lot of risk, yes, sir.
I think you had a market capitalization of $168 million.
I think so, yes.
However, this boom would soon come to an end.
Oh, it went bust in the mid-'80s. Our stock went down to $1. At one time, I think it was $72 a share or something like that. I can't remember. It's all on the record somewhere, but I was on paper worth a lot of money. I bought a nice house over here at that time and started kind of enjoying a little bit of money because I could take a little bit more money out of the company at that time, for the first time.
But what did you do to combat that, to cut costs as the boom?
We just reduced everything we could. I'd gone to Great Lake to hire all these great people that we had working for us. And I hated like the mischief lay off any of the guys in the field working on the rigs because they all had family support and everything. So when it got extra tough to cut costs, I cut my salary down to, I don't know. And all the time I was running the company, about 50 years, I finally got up to $300,000, I think.
Well, you cut your salary by
I cut my
two-thirds.
salary to $60,000, then to nothing. But I asked the employees, I said, I really don't want to lay off anybody. Will you all take a 5% reduction? And there was some grumbling, but everybody said sure. And then later on, I had to go for another 5% reduction, but then that was about enough. We had to reduce activities a lot, but we just tried to work cheaper. And
You sold off the company plane?
it was always my airplane, but I just charged the gas to the company.
30 company cars you sold off?
Well, we sold everything that was unnecessary. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes,
right.
sir. Yeah.
And then you kept your employees.
We kept Most of them, yes. Some of them, with the salary cuts, they found other places they could make more money, and I didn't blame them for leaving. But most everybody stayed, almost everybody. We worked our way through it. The New York Stock Exchange called me once in a while and said, "Hey, you guys are down to $1. We're going to have to delist you." And I said, "Oh, no, don't delist us. Hang on with us a little while longer." We had one really troublesome loan. Back when interest rates were high, we had made a long-term loan with an insurance company, I'll not name them, at 12% interest, and that was really gnawing on us. That was bad. We had a terrible time renegotiating that. By that time, I'd brought on board some really excellent people. We were finally able to reduce that back to living, working at interest rates.
This was a downtime that lasted for a number of years.
Yeah, we've been through a number of cycles.
And how do you sleep at night when you're in one of those situations?
Well, I had some stock that I could sell. By being public, I could sell a little piece of the company, like I said. I lived off of stock sales. I sold some stock for $3 a share and that kind of stuff, which I really didn't want to do, but rather than draw a salary out of the company, that's what I did. People worked pretty cheap, and we had to cancel a lot of expenses and things. We cut everything to the bone. Out there in the drilling area, we were able to cut costs enough that we could still keep most of our stuff going, and other people were falling like flies. I guess I'd lived on nothing during my lifetime. I knew how to kind of pinch down.
You were very conservative way back when.
We did.
That's what you used during this time.
We never got our salaries real big and high like some of them had, so we were able to survive. We shrunk a little bit, but in general, we kept growing. We had an objective of replacing our production, the oil and gas we'd produced. When John Nickel came aboard as a very professional manager, I finally talked John into coming aboard to run our oil company and build it. When we went on the New York Stock Exchange, we changed the name again to Unit Corporation because by that time, I don't think we had the pipeline company at that time, but we were drilling and we were production. And we had Unit Petroleum. We'd sort of divided Unit Petroleum off, and then we had Unit Drilling and Unit Petroleum. And later on, we bought a little company and started Superior Pipeline Company, or bought them. They were part of it. We had some other branches and things that we did. It was really fun. But the goal was always to build the company. Whatever you produce out of the ground, we wanted to do 150% of that the next year. We met that goal. I think they're still meeting that goal out there. I've been retired for 14 years now. I think they're still meeting that goal.
In the 80s, after 86 or so, the business slowly began to pick up.
Yes. The idea was to keep the structure in place, keep the people, keep the expertise here, and when things got better, we would be ready for it. We were able to take advantage of that. Yes, sir. The oil business cycled a lot of times since I've been in it.
The company drilled only 22 wells in 86, but that number more than doubled to 46 wells in 1987.
You got some good numbers there.
And the company's stock rebounded in 87, regaining about 16.7% of its price.
You've been doing your homework, John.
Right. Life was good again for you, and you didn't have any sleepless nights.
That's quite right.
Then it goes up, then it goes down.
Yep. It's not particularly high out there right now, but I watch the guys, and we've got wonderful people out there. I'm really not in close touch with them anymore. Right after I retired, I started another little company here called Kirchner Investments, which only means we are investing our own money and not other people's.
Speaking of companies, you also had an airplane company.
Oh, yeah. I never wanted to have the burden of airplanes on the company, so I started a little airplane resale company. We didn't broker airplanes for other people. We bought them. I say we. I owned it, but I established a line of credit with Back of Oklahoma. We'd have 5 or 10 airplanes around for sale. The profits off of that paid for my flying, really, and much of the company. So I owned some very interesting airplanes. Part of my pleasure and my goal was to learn how to fly each one of those airplanes by myself. Well, the Lear took 2 pilots, but the rest of them I flew by myself.
Does that company still exist?
It does, but it's more of a holding company now.
Yeah,
we finally got so many complications going there with all the salesmen and everybody working there that it became more trouble than it was worth. The name of that company was Sky King Corporation, which still is. I've still got 4 airplanes that are in that company, and one's going to be for sale here very shortly, as soon as I get a hot section done on a couple of the engines on one airplane. I sell about 1 or 2 airplanes a year still out of that company.
1997 was a big year because that was the passing of your partner.
Yeah, that was very sad. You know, as time went by, the things we were able to do as a private company, for instance, I used to sit on the bank board down at Bank of Oklahoma. Very interesting board members down there. One was Oral Roberts, and I used to sit next to Oral once in a while. You know, Oral is quite famous in Tulsa with Oral Roberts University and all the things he'd done. I met some very interesting people through being a director down there. And Don was a director of the bank where we borrowed our original money. The bank didn't own the building they were in down there. That was the American National Bank in Shawnee. But Don didn't want the bank to move or anything, so he bought the building. Then I think the bank was going to sell out to somebody in Oklahoma City or something. Then he wound up buying the bank, and he was assisted in all this by his success with Unit. So it let him do a lot of things he wanted to do. He bought the city of Shawnee a swimming pool and I think a library. Yeah, a lot of good things. I wanted everybody at Unit to be a millionaire or more if they could, all the employees. Many were.
Many were.
Yes. Or are still, yes.
Yeah. But then he died in September of 97.
Yeah.
At the age of 77 years old.
Yeah, it was a sad passing when Don died. He was a fun guy. He was a people magnet, you know, people at lunch gathered around him and everything. Great personality.
Let's move you ahead here into the 2000s. You then stepped down as CEO in 2001.
Yes, sir. Well,
you retained the chairmanship until August of 2003.
As I said, we had brought aboard this wonderful man, John Nickel, who had been a longtime employee of Amoco. He's a geologist, but a lot of practical sense, management sense, and production sense. I asked John to come aboard. I said, build an oil company out of this thing. We got a good nucleus for you here. We're already on the New York Stock Exchange. We got this good nucleus of production. Here's an egg for you. Build it into a full-size going thing. The company now is more of an oil company than it is a drilling company. However, they still have rigs. They're still building new ones.
So is John...
Instead of costing $50,000 a piece, they're costing $25 or $30 million a piece.
So John Nickel is still the head of...
No. His job was to build the oil company. I was getting older, and I'd been CEO ever since the company started. And he'd been president. It was just time for me to step aside. I hated to, but he was better at the job than me. So we moved him up, and I remained as chairman for a number of years. And I thought, this old guy's got to get out of here. We had a 70-year-old age limit for the board, and that meant for the employees, too. Well, we passed that. We had great board members like John Williams and Jack Zink, great people like that. But we almost always exceeded our 70-year-old age limit. John was 94, I think. When he died, he was still on the board.
When he was 94?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. He was a great board member. I still sit in on the board meetings, but I no longer vote because I thought I better get out of the way.
In 2002, the unit's drilling fleet grew to 75 rigs.
When we started buying out all our competitors, I was working my way out of the company at that time. It was an ego-building thing when you start acquiring all of your competitors, but the trouble was all of their equipment was the same age as our equipment, and as technology moved on, all that equipment sort of got old at the same time, and so we were left with a bunch of older rigs there. We were building new ones with new style, and rig makeup has changed quite a lot over the years. The way they're drilling them now with all the new technology and digital technology and everything, automatic roughnecks and automatic derrick man, it's totally changed. The rigs that'll walk instead of taking them apart and moving them by truck. It's changed so much. We're in the process, or I still say we as a unit, of building new style rigs. I don't know how many they have now. They have 9 or 10 or 11, I don't know.
Today you're emeritus.
I'm emeritus, yes.
And they were here at this building we're in now.
That's correct.
But they have moved. Tell us.
Yeah, we finally, just like in the Petroleum Club building downtown, the company grew enough that we finally took all the spare space they had in this building, and we were overflowing. We had people working in hallways and everything else. This time I'm going to say they, because I was easing out of it pretty much. They looked for a building they could buy. I think Helmrich and Payne grabbed the last one. They bought or rented or something, the Skelly building downtown, which would have been good for us. They couldn't find a building that worked for them downtown, so they decided to build a new one. That's when oil was $100 a barrel, though. They went out and built this beautiful building where you and I walked through the other day.
Tell us where that is.
That is out on Highway 75, right near Tulsa Hills. It's at 81st and Highway 75.
Gorgeous building.
It is a beautiful building.
How many employees do they employ out there?
I don't really know. I wish I could answer that, but we've been as high as, I think, 3,000. We started with one, me. I was the only employee for a while. And then my wife for a very brief time, and then on and on and on.
Doesn't that make you feel good? You drive up to that, knowing your story, how you had to work at it. Nothing was handed to you. You didn't inherit anything, really. And to see that building as a result of your tenaciousness, your conservative approach, has got to make you feel good.
I did inherit a little bit. I inherited that farm that my dad lived on.
When I said that, I thought about that.
And when my dad died, he had $225,000, which I inherited. I still got that, by the way. And my granddad also left me some minerals. He had a small part of this mineral company. He had about three of them. He owned a half of one. He owned like a fifth of another, and then some stuff with another partner. After his death, I went around as I had the money and slowly bought out all the heirs of those partners he had, some back in Pennsylvania. So I acquired some minerals over the years. Don Bodard and I and some other people bought the minerals out of the estate of the former banker that loaned us the original money, and over the years we collected minerals, and I pretty much live off the oil and gas income off of that these days.
You'll be 90 years old in a few weeks, and you have a very fine office here at 71st.
Still at the same place. Everybody in the company moved out to the new building except me.
What are you doing business-wise now at 90?
I'm still taking interest in drilling deals. We got about 3 going right now, and we're working deals on minerals and leasing things. Yes, I've got my son in here working with me now. I tried a little bit working my sons in the original company, but I found out early on that nepotism really doesn't work in a growing company. You really don't want relatives in there because everybody thinks, well, they're getting a special deal and I'm not getting it or something, and it just works out better when nobody is related, I think.
Do you take an assessment of yourself, how remarkable it is that you're still doing deals here at nearly 90 years old?
I don't think that's unusual. I don't.
That's because you're in
I need the money. I got to work.
That's because you're in your own body. It is quite remarkable, you must admit.
Well,
not many businessmen at 90 years old and as clear thinking as you are.
Well, I don't run into a lot of them, but I know some are pretty clear thinking, and there's some others around still working at 90.
Some.
Yeah,
some people say they've had difficult or stressful experiences, and you've had that, but you learn lessons from them. Was that true that you learned from them?
I learn from everybody. If I go through a day that I don't learn something or make some money, I've had a wasted day. I try to learn something every day or make some money. Or both, preferably both. There's a lot of days I don't make any money, but I try to learn something. I've learned from you.
I know you have.
I've learned quite a bit from you.
No, you haven't.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
As you look back in your life, you look at turning points. I would imagine the turning point was when you were able to borrow money against the land, and that was a big turning point for you.
Yes. I didn't actually go in there offering that to borrow money against. The banker told me, he said, I'm not going to loan you the money unless you pledge everything you've got because I'm not going to loan an upstart, brand new drilling company any money unless they've got a dog in the race, You got to pledge everything you've got. Yeah. So I pledged everything I had.
But we can put it this way, the fact that he would give you that $160,000 was a major turning point.
It was.
That really started you growing.
Absolutely. That was a turning point. Meeting Don Bodard was a turning point. My uncle, the timing of that thing coming about right at the time I got out of OU, that was a turning point. When my dad said, why don't you go ahead and take the time? I thought I was too old to go back to school. And he said, go down to OU and get that degree. Got my second degree. That was a turning point. I met some guys down there that later on, that I've ran across, Lou Ward, Bob Hefner, people like that. I met them down there at school. Every time I went to college, I met people that I did business with later, like Boo Dickens and others. I've had a lot of turning points. I've been so lucky all my life, really lucky. I mean, who would have thought they'd drop the bomb right before I had to go to Korea? Who would have thought that all the guys would leave my Army outfit right before I went to Korea? And all those turning points, I've been very, very lucky.
But every opportunity that was presented to you, you accepted that opportunity and you excelled at it. And
you got to be able to recognize your opportunities or what you perceive as an opportunity.
Now you're sitting at 90. How are you different from, say, maybe when you were 50 years old even?
I can't ride my motorcycle as well. I can't ride my bicycle as well. I certainly can't walk as far.
Okay.
Things like that.
Thinking-wise, and how you approach business and so forth, you think you're different today than you were?
It drives me crazy. I don't see enough business opportunities that I want to get in. I'm looking for business opportunities every day. I love making deals and doing things. I really do. I also like helping people and charities. I like to help my family more than probably most anything.
Yeah. Young people listen to this. What advice do you give to young people, who want to have their own business or start up a business? What advice would you give to them?
First of all, learn how to learn. There's learning, and then there's really learning to keep the knowledge. You have to train your brain to do that. You go to class or something, and you go in there and you remember enough of it to pass a test, and then boom, you move on to the next thing and forget all that old stuff. I don't know how you do it, but I had a turning point in my life when I really started retention. Like I say, I had to learn how to learn. I don't know what it is exactly, but you'll know when you get there. I desire, and I was trained with a good work ethic. My dad had roused me out of bed early, and he wasn't kind. Get your tail out of bed and get out there and milk those cows. One time, a bull got him down in the barn and worked him over pretty good, and he broke his hip and some things, and he was down for quite a while. And boy, that's when I was getting up early and milking the cows, doing all that stuff where I had to go to school, and then I had to work when I got out of school, and I was a busy guy. So I've been pretty busy all my life. I like to stay busy.
I admire you. You were having a problem with calculus, and then you took that correspondence course.
I realized finally why I didn't do well the first time I took calculus. I just didn't pay attention. I thought, okay, that's a lesson today. I won't need to know that. That's okay. And I found that there are many, many things you learn in life that you have to learn a step at a time. You can't just go to the end and learn it all at once, because you have to learn how it all goes together. It's building blocks. You got to learn how to stack the first two blocks together.
Yeah. How would you like to be remembered?
Oh, gosh, maybe not remembered. I don't know. It's just a guy that had a wonderful life and a wonderful family, had a lot of good luck, and was able to make it possible for a lot of other families to make a living and do well and create a company and environment where these families can enjoy work. I always hated jobs that I didn't like. That's stupid to say you hated a job you didn't like. It's pretty obvious. But I had some jobs I really liked and I really liked doing. And I really, really liked starting unit and doing all that. I loved the challenge, although it was scary and it was challenging and it was risky. I loved it. I loved taking that risk and everything. And I loved the fact that other people could join me, do well financially, and feel good about it. Love coming to work like I did.
Yeah. And you sit here with a stellar reputation. There's no scandal or nothing in your business or anything, and you have a great reputation in our town, in our country, as a matter of fact.
Well, I thank you for that. I've tried to stay out of jail. Yes, sir.
Well, I want to thank you for this time, King.
Well,
it was my pleasure. We spent more time together than we've known each other.
Yes.
And it was fun to do this. Thank you for doing it.
John, you're a famous celebrity yourself, and it's a pleasure to be able to sit here and talk to you, sir.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the Voices of Oklahoma podcast, stories taken from the oral history website, voicesofoklahoma.com. At the website, you will discover an array of storytellers. Many you will know. Some will be new to you, but all will be worth your time. This work depends on listeners like you, who are interested in learning about the great people of Oklahoma. Our website provides an opportunity to donate to this 501c3 project, which preserves Oklahoma history, one voice at a time. voicesofoklahoma.com.